Every morning at precisely 6:30, when the sky is still a soft grey and the manicured hedges cast long, sleepy shadows, Alina slips through the back gate of the Bellamy estate. The latch clicks shut behind her with a softness that comes from practice. She walks with practiced steps, quiet, light, careful not to stir the motion sensors or the sleeping household behind her. In her pressed navy uniform and thin cardigan, she carries a small foil-wrapped parcel, warm in her hands. Past the ivy-covered wall and down the side alley where the trash bins sit, she crouches and waits. The dog always comes, a wiry mutt, mottled brown and white, ribs visible beneath patchy fur. He emerges from under a rusted car with tentative steps, tail low, eyes watchful. Alina smiles softly, not expecting one in return. She unwraps the food, half a scrambled egg, a torn piece of toast, and sometimes, if the lady of the house left, her breakfast untouched, a sliver of smoked salmon. "Come on, Cariño," she murmurs, in a voice so soft it almost disappears. "Eat before someone sees." She lays the food on a napkin, always clean, always folded. The dog eats with desperate gratitude, and Alina talks about the weather. The boy at school who reminded her of her own, about the dreams that woke her last night. Things no one else listens to, from the tall hedges bordering the estate. A security camera follows the scene with mechanical precision. The screen flickers inside a dark room elsewhere somewhere nearby. Someone is watching. Every morning, the timestamp blinks in red. 6:32 a.m. The lens tightens its frame. Elena's hands move gently, brushing crumbs from the dog's muzzle, patting his bony side. Her voice is too soft for the microphone to catch, but her tenderness is visible. This isn't just kindness, it's a ritual, a secret act of devotion. The unseen observer doesn't move. They've watched this happen for 19 days. Each time, they zoom in a little closer. Each time, they pause a little longer on her face. This morning, Alina lingers. She adjusts the dog's collar, a piece of red ribbon she must have tied herself. The dog licks her hand. Her eyes shimmer not with tears, but with something older, worn, as if she's remembering someone she can't speak of. The camera tightens, its focus almost uncomfortably close now. Then, without warning, Alina stiffens. She doesn't turn her head, doesn't look around, but something shifts in her expression. A pause in her breathing, a tension in her shoulders. She senses it. She feels eyes. For a long moment, she stays perfectly still, hand resting on the dog's back. The screen watching her flickers once, then goes black. Alina had once stood before. A classroom of 30 children, chalk in hand, sunlight spilling through open windows in a small schoolhouse outside Ibadan. Her voice had carried with calm authority then, guiding young minds through arithmetic and grammar, her own son among them. She had been respected, proud, rooted. But after the accident, her husband's car crushed on a rain-slick highway, his life gone in a blink, everything shifted. Grief hollowed her quickly, and desperation followed close behind. When the agency reached out with promises of honest work abroad, a decent wage, and a better life for her son, she didn't hesitate. She sold what little remained of her savings, signed documents she barely had time to read, and boarded a plane to a country that had always been a distant dream, America. But that dream curdled fast. Now, Alina lives in the laundry room of the Granger's sprawling mansion, a narrow, windowless space between the pantry and the garage. Her mattress is a thin foam mat on the floor, tucked beside the humming washer. There's a small shelf for her clothes, a single bulb overhead, and a metal door that locks from the outside, though it rarely is. The illusion of freedom is just enough to keep her quiet. Her days begin before dawn and stretch well into the night, cleaning, cooking, polishing surfaces that are never truly dirty, obeying orders delivered with clipped smiles or sharp tongues, Vivian Granger is the kind of woman who wears silk robes at noon and calls her dinner parties events. Tall, porcelain-skinned, with a voice that turns saccharine around guests. And brittle behind closed doors, she rules the house like a queen in a glass castle. Her demands are endless, fruit cut precisely, pillows fluffed a certain way, silver polished to a mirror finish. Alina can't count the number of times Vivian has made her redo a task simply to assert control. She'll say things like people don't understand cleanliness, or try saying that again in English, this time. The humiliation always comes wrapped in false civility, delivered with a smile too wide to be real. Charles Granger, by contrast, is a ghost, a tech executive who floats in and out of the house like a shadow himself. He's often away on business, and even when home, he remains locked behind his office door, eyes fixed to screens, headphones muffling the world. He barely acknowledges an omission that somehow feels colder than Vivian's cruelty. He's not hostile, just absent, and in some ways that's worse. He never asks where she's from, never wonders why she looks tired, never even uses her name. Alina has no phone. Her passport was taken for safekeeping the day she arrived. She cannot leave the property without explicit permission, which is rarely granted. No visitors, no walks, not even a breath of unsupervised freedom. Her only connection to home is the money she wires through a third-party courier, meager scraps, sent back to her son, now living with her mother in Ibadan. Every cent she saves feels like a drop in an endless ocean, but it's something. It keeps her moving. The house is stitched with surveillance. Little black domes in the corners of rooms, subtle but ever present. Alina had assumed hoped were mostly for show, or only active when the Grangers were out. She never imagined anyone would bother watching her sweep floors or scrub grout. But lately, she's begun to feel it, the tightening knot in her chest, the weight of unseen eyes. Sometimes, when she pauses too long at a window or lingers in the kitchen after hours, she feels the urge to look over her shoulder. The cameras don't blink, don't speak, but they see, and someone, she's starting to suspect, might be watching, more than just for security. In all this, the only softness in her day comes at dawn. Each morning, before the world stirs, Alina steals away to the back gate, careful not to trigger the motion lights. She brings scraps from her dinner the night before, half an egg, a strip of meat, the heel of a loaf, and waits by the alley wall. The dog, lean and scarred, emerges from the shadows like a memory. She calls him Shadow, after the dog she had. Back home, the one that slept by her son's crib, the one she couldn't afford to bring with her. Shadow is silent, cautious, but his eyes are kind. With him, she's not a servant, not a prisoner, not invisible. She is simply a woman who still has something to give, but even that sanctuary feels like it's shrinking. The cold stares from Vivian are colder. The silences in the house stretch longer. Doors creak when no one's near. And now, after so many mornings of peace, there's a prickle on Elena's skin as she kneels beside the dogger, feeling she cannot name, but one she knows from another life. A presence, a watcher, a warning. Something, or someone, is beginning to move behind the curtain, and the walls that surround her, once merely confining, are starting to close in. The storm broke on a Thursday evening, sudden and cruel. Alina had just finished scrubbing the marble floor of the foyer when Vivian's shrill voice sliced through the silence, sharp enough to make her flinch. "Where are my earrings?" Vivian stood at the top of the staircase, one manicured hand on the banister, the other clutching a velvet jewelry box turned upside down. The diamond studs gone. Alina looked up, startled, still holding them up. "Madam, I don't know," but Vivian was already storming down the stairs, eyes wild, fury blooming across her porcelain face. "Don't lie to me. You're the only one who goes in my room when I'm out. Don't pretend you don't know." Within 20 minutes, the police arrived, 2 uniformed officers with tight expressions and rehearsed skepticism. Alina stood by the kitchen island, hands clasped, heart hammering as the house filled with tension and judgment. Vivian gave her version of events in smooth, indignant tones, describing Elena's erratic behavior and how she'd been acting strange for weeks. Alina tried to explain, but every word felt heavy and inadequate. She saw how the officers looked at her, a black immigrant woman in a wealthy white home, accused and presumed. They led her out of the house as the sun set behind the hedges, casting long shadows across the pristine driveway. She was questioned for hours at the station calmly, but with that air of polite suspicion that never quite lifts. She answered everything: where she had been, what she had touched, when she last cleaned the Granger's bedroom. Her voice trembled only once, when she mentioned her son. No one believed her. Why would they? She didn't even have her own ID. Then, almost too conveniently, the call came in. The earrings had been found tucked inside Elena's pillowcase, of all places. One of the officers raised an eyebrow, muttering that it was a little too neat. Another just sighed. When she was released, Charles Granger was there, waiting in the station lobby, wearing a rumpled shirt and a troubled expression. "There was a mistake," he said, almost gently. "We'll take care of it." His tone was measured, almost regretful. He told the officers he hadn't authorized the call, hadn't been informed until after the fact. Vivian, it seemed, had acted on her own. Still, he didn't apologize to Alina, just gave her a quiet look, one she couldn't quite redand. Walked her back to the car, but the damage was done. Vivian was livid, not that the earrings were found, but that Alina wasn't deported. That night, she locked the laundry room door from the outside and removed the curtain from the tiny air vent window. The house grew colder. Elena's duties multiplied. She was no longer allowed to eat leftovers unless given explicit permission. Her weekly walk to the mailbox, her only sanctioned trip beyond the gate, was revoked. Even her access to the garden was restricted. Cameras, Alina noticed, seemed to tilt more often in her direction now, following her as she moved through the halls. She tried to stay quiet, obedient. But that night, as the clock crept toward dawn, shadow didn't come. Alina waited by the back gate, her bundle of scraps clutched tightly, cold biting through her cardigan. She called softly, whistled the little tune she always used. Nothing. Panic fluttered in her chest. She grabbed a flashlight from the tool cabinet, slipped on old shoes, and opened the gate wider, stepping into the alley. There, a few feet from the rusted car, she saw it, a dark, wet smear on the concrete. Closer, she saw the paw print, misshapen and sticky with blood. Her breath caught. Shadow, wherever he was hurt, or worse. She searched the alley in widening circles, flashlight beam trembling in her hand, calling his name in a whisper, but the silence pressed in like a wall. Eventually, shivering and defeated, she returned to the house. She had barely stepped inside when a door creaked open down the hall. Not the wind, there was no wind tonight. She froze. The sound of slow, measured footsteps followed heel to wood, then another. She turned toward it, heart hammering, but the hallway was empty. Just the faint hum of the thermostat and the distant ticking of the grandfather clock. Still, she knew what she'd heard, and for the first time, the house felt not just cold, but wrong. Something beneath the polished surface had shifted, something she had no name for, but could feel in her bones. Not just cruelty, not just control, something else, something watching, something waiting. The house had always been silent, but now it throbbed with a kind of quiet menace, a presence that seemed to cling to the walls. Alina moved through her days with her shoulders tight, her eyes darting to the corners of rooms. The faint hum of cameras, no longer ignorable, but deafening. In her mind, Vivian had doubled down on her cruelty, barking commands from across rooms. snatching folded towels from Elena's hands, only to throw them back and demand she redo them. She accused her of leaving smudges on the silver, of undercooking the lamb, of breathing too loudly. But it was Charles's absence that unsettled Elena the most. He had returned, yes, but since the police incident, he hadn't once looked her in the eye. She rarely even heard his voice. Still, something about the way the cameras seemed to track her, the way lights flickered on just as she passed, made her feel him everywhere. At night, when she curled into her thin mattress in the laundry room, memories began to flood in moments she hadn't thought twice about before. The first time she fed Shadow, how she'd spoken to him like a child, without shame. How weeks later, she found a warm jacket folded at the foot of her bed, with no note, no explanation. She'd assumed it was a mistake, or, worse, a test. She wore it once, then stuffed it behind the dryer. Then came the shoes, simple, practical, but brand new. Again, no explanation. Vivian never noticed them. But Elena couldn't shake the sense that someone had been watching her with a kind of twisted admiration, as though her small kindnesses were being collected and studied. The jacket, the shoes, the returned earrings, the blood outside. None of it made sense. Unless it did. Unless someone was playing a long, patient game with her sanity. One night, she heard a noise overhead, faint but sharp. A dragging sound, followed by a hollow knock, like something heavy shifting in the attic. She waited, heart pounding, and when it came again, she grabbed her cleaning flashlight and crept up the narrow service stairs. The attic door was old, barely used, but not locked. She pulled it open with effort, the hinges groaning. Inside, dust hung in the air like a fog. Boxes lined the walls, some marked with decades-old labels. But at the far end of the attic, hidden behind a tarp, was a small table with a monitor still aglow. The screen flickered, showing the hallway, then the kitchen, then the guest room. Another feed cycled through the master bedroom, the garage, the garden, and her heart nearly stopped her laundry room. The angle was high, hidden. It had been there all along. She didn't scream. She stood there, shaking, the cold from the attic floor seeping into her feet. And then she knew, Charles. A sharp clarity broke through her fear. She saw it in flashes. The gentle way he'd spoken at the police station, the way he'd called it a mistake, the careful distance he'd kept from Vivian. She remembered the way the cameras had begun turning subtly toward her weeks before the earrings disappeared. He had been watching, her obsessing over her, her quiet, her care, her decency. And when that wasn't enough, he began manufacturing. Moments, the jacket, the shoes, the lost earrings. He'd hurt the dog. He wanted to be the one to rescue her from the hell he'd built around her. He wanted her to need him. The next morning, she barely made it through her chores. Her hands trembled as she polished the banister. Her eyes burned. Vivian caught her in the hallway and barked, "You look exhausted, or are you hungover? Don't think I don't see you sneaking around." Elena tried to walk past, silent, but Vivian stepped in front of her. "You think you've fooled everyone with your meek little act. You've been trying to seduce my husband, haven't you?" The accusation hit like a slap. Then the actual slap followed, a sharp crack across Elena's cheek. Vivian's voice dropped to a hiss. "You don't belong here. You never did." That night, Elena broke. She waited until the house was quiet, until the lights were out and Vivian's bedroom door had been shut for hours. She packed her small bag in silence, a few clothes, a tin with what little cash she had managed to hide, the jacket she once feared, and a faded photo of her son. Her hands were steady. Her mind was calm in that terrifying way only desperation could create. She crept down the stairs, avoided the camera lines, and made her way to the back gate. She never made it out. Charles stood there in the moonlight, hands in his coat pockets, a calm smile stretched across his face. "You were going to leave," he said softly, like a father catching a child sneaking out. Without saying goodbye, Alina froze. The silence between them roared. His eyes were gentle, almost sad. You're scared, I understand, but this isn't the answer. She stepped back, but he didn't move. I've done everything I could to protect you, he continued. Vivian would have ruined you. The police would have sent you back, but I made sure you were safe. His tone turned cold beneath the warmth. I can keep you safe, Elena, but only if you stay. Her voice cracked as she spoke for the first time in what felt like hours. You planted the earrings. You hurt Shadow. He tilted his head, as though trying to understand why she was upset. I had to make sure you saw who really cared about you. I know what you need. I've watched. I've listened. Elena's stomach turned. This wasn't admiration. It was possession. He wanted her gratitude, her obedience, her submission. And if I leave, his smile faded. If you leave, I'll report you. Immigration fraud, a false visa, a fake work placement. You'll never see your son again. You know how easily the system listens to people like me. She saw it then, not the mask, but the man beneath it. Not quiet and distant, but calculating, dangerous. A predator with soft hands. The house had never belonged to Vivian. It had always been his. And now, so was she, unless she could find a way to burn it all down. Alina didn't sleep that night, though she lay perfectly still on her mat in the laundry room, her back to the door, her face to the wall. She kept her breathing slow, steady, rehearsed. In the morning, she smiled when Charles greeted her in the hallway, a mug of coffee in his hand like any ordinary husband. She nodded when he asked if she was feeling better. She even thanked him softly when he said he'd spoken to Vivian and that things would be easier now. Inside, her chest burned with every lie she spoke, but she masked it well. Years of quiet suffering had trained her for this final performance. If he wanted submission, she would give it to him just long enough to escape. That evening, while cleaning the kitchen, she pocketed a pen and tore a small sheet from the back of an old grocery pad. Later, in the laundry room, with the door shut and the washer running loud, she crouched beside her old pile of stored cleaning rags and wrote, "Help, I'm being held. There's footage. Cameras in every room." She folded the note in half, then again and again, until it fit neatly in her palm. At midnight, when the house had gone still, she crept out to the backyard. Her breath fogged in the air as she knelt beside the rusted fence post where she used to feed Shadow. The food bowl still sat there, untouched since the night of the bloody print. With trembling fingers, she slipped the note beneath it and returned to her room, her heart pounding so loudly she thought it might shake the house apart. What she didn't know, what she could only hope, was that someone would still be looking. The next afternoon, a girl named Lila from the neighborhood, no more than 12, pedaled past on her pink bike as she often did after school. She had once waved to Alina during the morning feedings, sometimes leaving a biscuit or scrap herself for the skinny dog. That day, she slowed, saw the empty food bowl, and out of idle curiosity, lifted it. The note fluttered out, damp with dew, but still legible. Curious, then concerned, she ran straight to her older brother, who worked part-time at the local animal rescue center. The name written on the back of the note, Hollow Pines Rescue, matched the old coin jar Alina had once dropped change into on the day she passed their booth at the town farmer's market, a name she'd remembered as a fragile link to kindness, even in the darkness. The brother recognized the dog's description to Shadow had been reported missing months ago, part of a cruelty investigation. And more importantly, he recognized Charles Granger. The center had installed cloud-based surveillance on the back fence of the property weeks ago, hoping to track the dog's movement. The footage, automatically uploaded, showed more than just a stray. It showed a woman kneeling each morning, feeding, speaking gently, and on one disturbing night being watched. The rescue volunteer didn't hesitate. He sent the footage to an officer he knew, a woman who had once taken a complaint from a previous house staff member at the Granger residence, a complaint that had mysteriously disappeared. But this time, there was no disappearing. Not with the footage, not with the note, not with Elena's trembling handwriting that made one thing unmistakably clear. She was in danger, and she was asking for help. 2 mornings later, the house woke to the sound of fists pounding on the front door and officers flooding the property. Elena stood frozen in the hallway, mop still in hand, as uniformed men and women stormed past her, shouting names, barking orders. Vivian screamed from upstairs, her robe in disarray, her face pale with fury and confusion. Charles emerged from his office, his calm exterior finally cracking. "There's been some mistake," he began, but the lead detective, a woman in plain clothes, cut him off. "No mistake, Mr. Granger. We have surveillance footage. We have witness testimony, and we have a pattern." Charles was handcuffed before he could say another word. He turned once toward Elena, his expression not of anger, but betrayal, like she had broken some sacred trust. She held his gaze without blinking. Vivian shrieked when the officers placed her under arrest for aiding and concealing surveillance equipment without disclosure. "I didn't know," she cried, but her voice was already being drowned out by the Miranda rights being read aloud in the foyer. It wasn't until the house was nearly empty that Elena finally stepped outside. The air was fresh, real. She stood near the back gate, the place where she had once whispered to a stray dog and clung to those small moments of grace. A young officer approached her gently. "We've recovered your passport," she said, holding it out like something sacred. "And your visa situation is being reviewed. You're safe now." Elena took the passport with both hands. Her fingers shook. She didn't cry, not yet. She looked out past the alley where Shadow had once limped into her life. Maybe he was still alive somewhere. Maybe he was the one who led someone back to her. The house behind her, with all its marble floors and soulless beauty, now stood hollow. The cage was open, the watcher was gone, and for the first time in years, Elena didn't feel like she had to whisper to be heard. Elena stood by the window of her small room above the Hollow Pines Rescue Center, watching morning sunlight spill across the dew-soaked grass. The air smelled of damp earth and lavender, and for the first time in a long while, she wasn't afraid of what the day might bring. The center had given her more than just a roof over her head. They'd given her a sense of ground beneath her feet again. Legal protections had come quickly after the investigation, and with the help of a calm, tireless advocate named Naomi, Elena was officially recognized as a victim of labor trafficking and coercion. Her status was safe. Her voice, once buried in silence, now mattered. Naomi became more than a caseworker. She became a friend. She sat with Elena for hours, listening as Elena recounted the events of her life, not as testimony, but as truth. Together, they recorded it, every lie she was told, every morning feeding Shadow, every slow unraveling of controls, so that other women, trapped in quiet servitude, might recognize their own cages. Elena's voice shook during the first recording, but Naomi never looked away. "You survived," she said softly. "That makes you stronger than the ones who tried to break you. It wasn't easy. The world outside the mansion was no more perfect than the one inside it had pretended to be." Some nights, Elena still woke in a sweat, convinced she was being watched. Loud footsteps in the hallway made her flinch. But healing, she was learning, wasn't a straight roaded, curved and backtracked. It dipped in shadows before rising toward light. The rescue center gave her space to breathe, to rest, to start over without being afraid to exhale. When a job opened at a local school, Naomi encouraged her to apply. The title was small teacher's assistant, but the weight of it was immense. The classroom was bright, the children loud and joyful, and the work was familiar in a way that made her remember who she had been before grief and desperation twisted her path. She stood at the back of the class most days, guiding students through letters and numbers, her voice soft but steady. Her accent was no longer mocked, it was mimicked with affection, curiosity. Miss Elena, they called her, wide-eyed and eager. Most evenings, she sat at the desk in her small room and wrote letters to her son. Real letters, stamped and folded, full of stories about the center, the school, the kind woman named Naomi, who brought her coffee on rainy days. Her son would be joining. Her son paperwork was already underway. She didn't know how he would react to seeing her after so long, but she clung to the thought of holding him again, of hearing his laughter. In the same room, in the garden behind the center, Alina planted flowers low, sturdy blooms in colors she remembered from Nigeria. She watered them each morning, kneeling in the dirt, hands steady with purpose. Around her, children from the center played with the rescue dogs, laughter echoing into the sky. She smiled at them, waved, even laughed sometimes herself. But there was always something in her eyes, a quiet depth, an ache that never fully left. The scars were there, invisible but ever present. They didn't make her weaker, they made her real. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the treetops, Alina sat on a bench with a notebook in her lap. She wrote without urgency, her pen moving, in slow, sure strokes. She paused now and then to look at the sky, to close her eyes and simply be. Freedom didn't feel like a scream, it felt like stillness, like silence, finally unthreatening. Shadow never returned, but she liked to believe he'd been a messenger, a ghost who led her out of the dark. Somewhere she hoped he had found peace, too, and so had she. Not perfect, not unscarred, but peace nonetheless. The morning was still, the sky painted in pale blue and soft gold. As Alina walked down the quiet street that once felt like the edge of her world, the houses were the same tall gates, trimmed hedges, windows that reflected more than they revealed, but the weight in her steps was gone. She carried a small piece of bread in her pocket, out of habit more than expectation, and then she heard it, a short, curious bark. She turned, heart quickening, and saw a young dog trotting out from beneath a parked car, tail wagging, eyes bright. It wasn't Shadow, but something in its gait, in the way it tilted its head at her, made her smile the same way. She crouched, slowly, holding out the bread. The dog padded closer, sniffed, then took it gently from her hand. Alina laughed softly, a sound that once felt foreign in her mouth. She reached out and stroked its fur, murmuring something in Yoruba, the way she used to with her son, with her dog, with herself, when no one else listened. From across the street, Naomi stood by a fence, watching, not hiding, not spying, just witnessing. A cup of coffee warmed her hands, and her expression held no judgment, only quiet pride. This was no longer surveillance. It was connection, trust, a shared knowing that some moments more quiet, tender carry the power to change everything. Alina didn't see her. She didn't need to. She stayed there a moment longer, hand resting on the dog's head, eyes lifted to the rising sun. The screen fades to black. Sometimes the smallest act of kindness is what saves you, even when you don't know someone's watching.